The observation deck of Harmony 7 station offered a view that stretched across the cosmos, but Ambassador Claire Morrison found herself staring at her own worried reflection in the transparent viewport. Behind her, the diplomatic team from Earth whispered among themselves with voices tight from anticipation and fear. The moment they had been preparing for was finally here, and nobody knew if humanity was ready for what came next. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes looked up from his console and announced that the alien ship had arrived. Claire turned slowly to watch as the massive Thraxian vessel appeared from faster-than-light travel, and the sight made her breath catch in her throat. The ship was enormous and easily 3 times larger than the biggest space station humanity had ever built. Its hull was covered with strange organic ridges that pulsed with soft bioluminescent patterns, and the whole thing looked both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Gregory Walsh stood beside Claire and straightened his formal jacket nervously. He had been her assistant for 5 years, but nothing in their training had prepared them for this moment. First contact with an alien species was supposed to be humanity's greatest achievement, but the messages they had received over the past 6 months made Claire worry that this meeting might become humanity's greatest mistake instead. The tow airlock cycled open with a sharp hiss, and the Thraxian delegation entered the station. Leading them was Diplomat Zarnell, who looked like someone had combined a praying mantis with a squid and added 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on an elongated head. The translation device attached to his body turned his clicking sounds into perfect English, and his first words were polite. "Enough." Claire extended her hand the way they had been told. The aliens would expect, and Zarnell wrapped a manipulator tentacle around it briefly. The texture was dry and scaly and felt nothing like human skin. She forced herself to smile and welcomed the diplomat while trying not to show how nervous she really felt inside. They moved to the conference chamber, and the negotiations began with Zarnell explaining the benefits of joining something called the Thraxian Concordat. He talked about advanced technology and protection from hostile species and access to a vast galactic economy that spanned thousands of light years. Claire listened carefully and took notes and asked questions that seemed reasonable. For the first few hours, everything seemed positive, and she started to think maybe this would work out after all. But as time passed, the true nature of the offer became clear, and Claire felt her stomach twist with growing anger. Zarnell explained that humanity would be assigned to something called the 7th tier of the Concordat hierarchy. He said this was generous for a newly contacted species because most newcomers started at the 9th tier. Claire asked what the 7th tier meant exactly, and the answer made her blood run cold. Humanity would be permitted limited self-governance, but only under the supervision of a species from the 6th tier. Earth's military would be dissolved completely and replaced with Concordat peacekeeping forces. The planet's economic output would be integrated into the Concordat distribution network. Human representatives would have advisory status in the lower councils, but no real power to make decisions. Claire exchanged glances with Gregory and saw her own horror reflected in his eyes. This was not membership in a galactic community. This was conquest dressed up in diplomatic language. She asked carefully what would happen if humanity wished to maintain full sovereignty over its own affairs. Zarnell's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, and his translator made the confusion clear in his tone. He explained that sovereignty was a primitive concept that had no place in the modern galaxy. The Concordat had maintained peace for 3,000 years precisely because member species surrendered individual sovereignty for collective benefit. No species could stand alone in the dangerous galaxy, and those who tried always failed. Claire quoted an old Earth saying about giving up liberty to purchase temporary safety, and how those who did deserve neither. Zarnell listened and then told her bluntly that she misunderstood the situation. This was not a negotiation between equals. The Concordat was extending this offer as a courtesy. Humanity lacked the capacity to exist independently in the galactic environment, and the sooner they accepted that reality, the better things would be for everyone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and Claire asked directly if he was saying humanity had no choice in the matter. Zarnell leaned forward and explained that reality dictated certain truths. Human technology was primitive. Human military forces were laughable by Concordat standards. Human territory encompassed only a single star system, Nobody could possibly stand against the combined might of 47 advanced civilizations. He told Claire to accept the offer and join willingly because the alternative would be most unfortunate for everyone on Earth. Claire stood slowly and her diplomatic mask slipped just enough to show the anger underneath. She said they had nothing more to discuss and humanity would need time to consider the generous offer. The meeting ended badly and Claire knew the moment she returned to Earth that everything would change. 2 days later she stood before the United Earth Council in Geneva, and the chamber was packed with representatives from every nation. Their faces appeared on screens lining the circular walls and everyone looked worried. Claire gave her report and concluded by saying the aliens expected complete surrender disguised as partnership. The council chamber erupted in angry voices and people shouted over each other trying to be heard. Admiral Peter Brooks sat in the military advisory section and waited for the noise to die down. He was a gruff man with 40 years of military service, and when he spoke his voice carried weight. He said they had anticipated this possibility, and the Earth Defense Force had been preparing for multiple scenarios since first contact occurred. Council Chairman Victor Ortega asked what they could possibly do against 47 advanced species, and Brooks allowed himself a thin smile. He said humanity would do what it always did when faced with impossible odds. They would innovate and adapt and fight like hell if necessary. Counselor Lisa Park looked horrified and asked if he was suggesting war. Brooks activated a holographic display that showed a warship unlike anything in previous human design. He said 3 months ago they completed construction of the USS Vengeance, and he recommended sending her as humanity's response to the ultimatum. The hologram showed a sleek battleship bristling with weapons that represented the bleeding edge of Earth technology. Fusion cores could output energy approaching a small star. Advanced sensors could track targets across millions of kilometers. Railguns could accelerate projectiles to a fraction of light speed. The ship was beautiful and deadly, and represented humanity's best hope for survival. Counselor Hassan Ahmed shook his head and pointed out it was just one ship against entire fleets. Brooks confirmed it was one ship, but she would be commanded by the finest crew in the Earth Defense Force. If the Concordat wanted to test humanity's resolve, then they should give them a test. Nobody would forget. Claire studied the hologram and her diplomatic instincts fought against the memory of Zarnell's condescending certainty. She asked Brooks what would happen if they sent the ship and the aliens destroyed it. Would they not have provoked a war they could not win? Brooks met her eyes steadily and said if they surrendered without showing what they were capable of, then they would be slaves for generations. Sometimes diplomacy needed to be backed by strength, or else it was just begging. The council voted after 3 hours of heated debate, and the decision was nearly unanimous. Earth would not surrender. Earth would not bend. Earth would stand and fight if that was what the aliens wanted. Captain Daniel Hayes received the encrypted transmission while the USS Vengeance orbited high above Earth. He read the message twice and looked up at Commander Lisa Martinez, who stood at attention waiting for orders. Hayes was 42 years old and a veteran of conflicts in the asteroid belt and the war for Mars independence. He had commanded destroyers and frigates, but the Vengeance was his first true battleship, and she was beautiful. 700 meters of human engineering and determination. He told Lisa that Earth had rejected the alien ultimatum, and the Thraxians were sending a fleet to demonstrate the futility of human defiance. Lisa asked how many ships were coming, and Hayes said 12 warships would arrive in 72 hours. They were ordered to intercept and engage. Lisa calculated the odds quickly and said 12 to 1 meant the aliens really thought humanity would be easy to defeat. Hayes stood and moved to the command chair that dominated the bridge center. His crew turned to look at him, and he saw the mixture of fear and excitement in their young faces. Most of them had never been in real combat before. This would be their first true test against an enemy that considered humanity beneath notice. He told them to listen carefully, and his voice carried to every station on the bridge. In 3 days they would meet an enemy that thought the battle was already won. The aliens thought humans were primitive. They thought human technology was inferior. They thought the Vengeance would run or surrender the moment their fleet appeared. Hayes paused and let that sink in before finishing. He said the aliens were about to learn that humanity did not run and did not surrender, and sure as hell did not go gentle into. The Concordat fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system in a display designed to strike fear into anyone watching. 12 massive warships materialized from faster-than-light travel and arranged themselves in a formation that looked like the open jaws of some enormous predator. Their hulls gleamed with active energy shields and weapon arrays pulsed with barely contained power that could vaporize planets if given the order. High Commander. Vexthar stood on the bridge of his flagship called Divine Mandate and surveyed the primitive star system spread out before him. A single yellow star sat at the center with several rocky planets close in and gas giants further out. Crude scanning showed most human activity concentrated around the third planet and its moon with smaller installations on the fourth planet. Everything looked exactly as primitive as he had expected. His tactical officer named Narvok was a six-limbed creature from the krill species, and he manipulated the holographic display with practiced efficiency. Sensors detected minimal military presence around the human homeworld, with perhaps 40 small warships scattered throughout the system. Nothing present could threaten even one concordant vessel, much less 12 of them working together. This would be over quickly, and then they could move on to more important matters. Vexthar asked about the human response to their arrival, and Narvok reported that the humans had broadcast a message demanding immediate withdrawal. They claimed the Concordat was violating their territorial sovereignty and must leave at once. The tone carried clear amusement because the idea of these primitives having sovereignty was absurd. Vexthar clicked his mandibles in satisfaction and ordered the ultimatum transmitted on all human frequencies so every person with a radio would hear what came next. The message went out, and Vexthar made sure his words were clear and intimidating. He identified himself as High Commander of the Thraxian Concordat and informed the humans they had rejected the offer of peaceful integration, which had been unwise. They now faced the full military might of 47 species. He offered one final opportunity to surrender their system immediately and dissolve their military forces and accept Concordat governance. They had 12 hours to comply. Failure would result in seizure of their worlds by force. Their resistance was futile and their technology primitive, and they could not possibly win. On Earth, in the underground command bunker beneath, Geneva Admiral Peter Brooks listened to the transmission with a room full of military and political leaders. The silence afterward was heavy and uncomfortable. Chairman Victor Ortega said quietly that 12 hours was not much time, and the aliens were not even pretending this was negotiation anymore. Brooks agreed and said it never had been negotiation in the first place. The Concordat was giving humanity time to panic and realize how outmatched they were and break psychologically before firing a single shot. Counselor Lisa Park asked if they really were outmatched, and Brooks gestured to the tactical display where a single green icon represented the USS Vengeance, currently accelerating on an intercept course. He admitted that on paper they were absolutely outmatched. 12-to-1 odds, and each alien ship massed twice what the Vengeance did. Their shields were stronger and their weapons had longer range. In a straight fight, Earth would lose badly, but Brooks said he had not become an admiral by fighting fair battles. He explained that Captain Hayes had his orders and the Vengeance would engage the enemy fleet, but not on their terms and not in any way they expected. The Concordat had spent 3,000 years establishing dominance through standard protocols and engagement patterns. They expected enemies to either run away or fight conventionally. Hayes was going to give them something they had never encountered before, which was human ingenuity, combined with sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Aboard the USS Vengeance, Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge watching his crew work with smooth efficiency. They had been accelerating toward the enemy fleet for 6 hours, and every passing minute brought them closer to the moment when everything would be decided. He ordered a status report, and Commander Lisa Martinez looked up from her tactical station to respond. All weapon systems were online and ready. Fusion cores operated at 100% capacity. Point defense grids were active. Electronic warfare suite was primed and waiting. The crew stood at battle stations throughout the ship. Lisa reported they would reach enemy weapons range in 18 hours, but the aliens could hit the Vengeance long before human weapons could reach them. Their range advantage was roughly 3-2. Hayes had studied the technical data that Earth scientists extracted from Concordat, transmissions, and the one scout ship they had been allowed to scan during early contact. The aliens held advantages in almost every category of ship performance. Almost every category, but not all of them. And that small gap was what Hayes planned to exploit until it became a canyon. He told Lieutenant Kevin Chanik Communications to broadcast a message on all frequencies. and make sure every human outpost and every concordate ship received it clearly. The bridge went quiet as Hayes composed his thoughts carefully, because the next words would set the tone for everything that followed. He identified himself as captain of the United Earth Defense Force ship, Vengeance, and addressed the Thoraxian Concordate fleet directly. He told them they had entered human space without permission and made demands, backed by threats of violence. They believed superior numbers and technology guaranteed victory. They believed humanity would surrender rather than face their might. He said they were wrong on both counts. Humanity did not surrender. Humans did not bend or break for anyone. If the Concordate wanted the solar system, then they should come and take it, because the Vengeance would be waiting. The transmission went out, and a minute later, the Concordate response came back. Vexthar's voice dripped with contempt even through the translation software. He called Hayes' bravado entertaining but completely pointless. 12 warships against 1 meant the outcome was already decided. He offered what he called Warrior's Mercy by saying if Hayes surrendered immediately, then his crew would be allowed to live as prisoners. Refuse and the Vengeance would be reduced to floating debris before the Concordate moved on to conquer Earth itself. Hayes had 1 hour to decide. Hayes looked around the bridge at his crew and saw no fear in their faces, only hard determination. He told Chen to send a reply consisting of exactly 4 words. "Come and get us." The message transmitted, and Hayes allowed himself a cold smile, because the trap was being set and the enemy had no idea what they were flying into. The hour passed slowly, and then the Concordate fleet began advancing into the solar system with their formation perfect and their confidence absolute. They had done this hundreds of times before to dozens of different species. The pattern was always the same. Demonstrate overwhelming force and watch the enemy crumble and move in for quick victory. But as they crossed the orbit of the 7th planet, something unexpected happened. The human ship did not retreat toward the protection of its homeworld defenses. The Vengeance did not try to flee to where reinforcements might help. Instead, the battleship altered course and accelerated at a rate that surprised Concordate sensors. The ship was heading not toward them, but toward the inner system and specifically toward the asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets. Narvok looked confused and asked what the humans were doing. Running deeper into their own system made no sense, because now they were trapped with the Concordate fleet between them and any possible escape route. Vexthar studied the tactical display with growing unease. Something felt wrong about this. The human ship moved with clear purpose and not panic. They seemed to be heading toward the asteroid belt deliberately as if they wanted to fight there. Vexithar ordered all ships to maintain formation and pursue. They would not let the humans escape, even though escape seemed impossible at this point. But Captain Hayes had no intention of escaping from anything. He asked his crew how long until engagement, and Lisa reported the enemy fleet would enter extreme weapons range in 40 minutes. She asked why they were running toward the asteroid belt because would that not make the Vengeance an easier target? Hayes allowed himself a cold smile and asked what advantage humanity had over the Concordate. Lisa thought for a moment and suggested that humans knew this solar system better than any alien invader could. Hayes agreed enthusiastically. The enemy had better ships and better shields, and better weapons, but they did not know Sol. They did not know every asteroid and every gravitational eddy and every piece of debris that floated through this system, and most importantly, they had never fought in an environment like the asteroid belt. Understanding dawned on Lisa's face, and she said they were going to use the asteroids as cover. Guerrilla warfare in 3 dimensions where the enemy's size became a disadvantage. Hayes said it was more than just cover. They would use every trick and every unconventional tactic and every feature of the solar system against the invaders. The Concordate had been fighting the same way for thousands of years, and they had forgotten how to adapt to new situations. Humanity was going to remind them why adaptation was the greatest strength any species could possess. The Vengeance plunged into the asteroid belt and advanced sensors mapped safe passages through the tumbling rocks. Behind the USS Vengeance emerged from behind a massive tumbling asteroid already firing every weapon system at maximum capacity. This time the targeting was absolutely perfect because every railgun round and every missile and every energy beam struck the Divine Mandate shields at precisely the same point. The concentrated impacts overloaded the alien shields through sheer, focused power, and alarms began blaring throughout the Concordate flagship. Vex Thar roared in shock as his shields flickered and nearly failed. This was impossible. because the human ship's accuracy exceeded anything their primitive technology should allow. Narvok reported frantically that the human targeting was beyond their supposed capabilities, and somehow they were hitting with perfect precision every single time. Vexthar ordered all ships to focus fire on the human vessel and destroy it immediately before it could do more damage, but the Vengeance was already gone and diving behind a cluster of asteroids while using the drone network to plot a course that kept massive rocks between the ship and enemy weapons at all times. Hayes had studied Concordate tactics for months and knew they relied on overwhelming firepower applied systematically. They expected enemies to either flee in terror or be destroyed quickly. They did not expect an enemy that could see everything and move unpredictably and strike from unexpected angles. The 12 Concordate warships spread out through the asteroid belt, trying to box in the human ship and eliminate any possible escape route. High Commander Vexthar watched his tactical display and ordered his fleet to coordinate, using firing pattern Delta 7. When the human emerged from cover he wanted, overlapping fields of fire that left no gap in coverage and no way to survive. His reputation was at stake now, because the rest of the Concordate would hear how a single primitive ship had damaged his flagship. On the Vengeance Bridge, Commander Lisa Martinez studied the enemy formation carefully. The Concordate ships were repositioning to create a net of potential fire zones using mathematical precision designed to eliminate any escape vector. She reported they were trying to box the ship in and asked if they were now trapped. Hayes studied the tactical display enhanced by perfect data from the drone network, and he could see exactly where each enemy ship was positioned along with their weapon arcs and shield configurations. He said the aliens thought they had the Vengeance trapped, but the problem was they were thinking 3 moves ahead while humanity was thinking 5 moves ahead. He asked Lisa what the formation's biggest weakness was, and she analyzed the display for several seconds. The enemy was spread too thin because to cover all exit vectors, they had positioned ships at maximum effective firing range from each other. If the Vengeance hit one position hard and fast, the others could not provide immediate support without abandoning their coverage zones. Hayes agreed and pointed to one section of the formation. Ship 7 on the lower flank was positioned slightly further out than the others. They needed to cover that vector, so they had extended beyond mutual support range. That ship was the target. He ordered the helm to plot a course out of the asteroid cluster at full emergency acceleration, heading directly at ship 7. Navigation was told to thread through asteroids right until the last possible moment using the biggest rocks available for cover. Lieutenant Kyle Murphy at the helm warned this would be an extremely rough ride. Hayes said he was counting on it being rough. He ordered weapons to prepare everything for immediate firing the moment they cleared the asteroid field. If this plan did not work perfectly, then the Vengeance would be caught in open space with all 12 enemy ships able to target them. Lisa pointed out quietly that they had better make sure it worked then. The Vengeance began accelerating, and her fusion drives pushed her to the absolute limits of structural integrity. She wove through the asteroid field like a small fighter craft, despite being a 700-meter warship. The crew was thrown against their restraints as Murphy pulled maneuvers that would have torn apart most ships. But the Vengeance had been built specifically for this kind of combat. Earth engineers, lacking advantages in shields and weapon range, had focused instead on maneuverability and structural strength. On the Divine Mandate Bridge, Narvok suddenly looked up from his console with alarm. The human ship was accelerating hard on heading 047 Mark 83. They were making a run for it straight toward Ship 7's position. Vexthar saw the opportunity immediately and ordered Ship 7 to prepare for engagement. All other vessels should close formation and pursue because the humans were fleeing directly into the trap. Ship 7's commander was a Irathi named Grelkor, and he tracked the approaching human vessel with growing excitement. Finally, a chance to prove Concordate superiority in direct combat. The primitive ship was heading straight for him. He ordered all forward weapons charged and ready to fire the moment the humans cleared the asteroid field. This would be over in seconds. The Vengeance burst from the tumbling rocks like a missile, and her angle of approach was calculated to absolute perfection. For exactly 3 seconds, both ships had clear firing lines on each other. Both ships fired simultaneously. Ship 7's energy lances crossed space at light speed and struck the Vengeance forward shields. The human ship shuddered violently and alarms blared as shields absorbed energy they were never designed to handle. Consoles sparked and smoke filled the air. The damage control officer shouted that forward shields were down to 30% capacity. But the Vengeance counterattack was something Ship 7 had never encountered before. The railguns fired first and accelerated penetrator rounds to 20% of light speed. The kinetic energy was absolutely devastating. Following immediately behind came a swarm of missiles equipped with quantum-entangled guidance systems that could not be jammed or spoofed by any known countermeasures. Then came the real surprise. The Vengeance forward ports opened and released a dozen small craft that Concordate sensors had completely missed. They were boarding drones equipped with plasma cutters and programmed with one simple mission: attach to enemy hull and start cutting through into critical systems. Ship 7 shields held against the initial railgun. Barrage but concentrated fire kept hitting the same point, over and over without pause. The missiles came next, and some sacrificed themselves against the shields while others waited and calculated optimal timing. When the shields flickered for just a microsecond under sustained assault, 3 missiles slipped through the gap. The explosions tore into Ship 7 hull and the boarding drones followed through the breaches immediately. Grelkor screamed, asking what was happening as his ship shuddered from internal damage. His tactical officer reported in panic that unknown weapons were inside the hull, cutting through internal bulkheads. They were venting atmosphere on multiple decks. The human boarding drones were small, but they did not need to be large. They found critical systems with perfect accuracy guided by the Vengeance sensor network and methodically destroyed them. Power conduits and shield generators and weapons control systems were systematically eliminated. Within 60 seconds, Ship 7 was completely crippled. Grelkor ordered his ship to fall back and requested immediate support from the fleet. But the Vengeance was not finished. Hayes had no interest in prolonged engagement. He asked Lisa if they had a firing solution on the enemy reactor, and she confirmed targeting was locked. She warned that if they hit the reactor, the ship would be destroyed. There would be some survivors, but thousands would die in the explosion. Hayes' jaw tightened as he thought of Earth and the Concordate ultimatum, and what would happen if they failed here. He gave the order to fire. A single railgun round, perfectly targeted, struck Ship 7 reactor housing. The result was catastrophic and immediate. The alien warship exploded in a brief bright flash that lit up the entire asteroid field. Aboard the Divine Mandate, every Thoraxian on the bridge fell, silent as they watched one of their warships simply cease to exist. Vexithar whispered that this was impossible because no single ship could do that to a Concordate warship. But the evidence was undeniable. In less than 2 minutes of actual combat, the humans had destroyed a vessel that represented hundreds of years of naval tradition and engineering. He ordered all ships to pursue at maximum speed. He wanted the human ship destroyed now before it could do more damage. The Vengeance was already diving back into the asteroid belt, but her shields were badly damaged and the crew was shaken. They had won the first real engagement, but everyone on the bridge knew what it had cost. Shield generators operated at barely 30% capacity, and they had expended significant portions of their missile inventory. Hayes ordered a damage report while coughing in the smoke-filled air. Lisa reported forward shields holding at 30% and aft shields at 70%. They had taken hits to the forward hull, but structural integrity was maintained. Casualties were light, mostly from flying debris when consoles exploded. The ship remained combat capable. She paused and added that 11 enemy ships were pursuing. They could not win another fight like that because they had gotten lucky with Ship 7. The aliens were not expecting human tactics, but they would not make that mistake again. Hayes nodded while studying the tactical display. The drone network showed the Concordate fleet converging on their position with clear purpose. Asset Cache Alpha was nothing more than a hollowed-out asteroid drifting among thousands of others, and completely unremarkable to any casual observer. But to Captain Daniel Hayes and the crew of the USS Vengeance, it represented 6 months of secret preparation and humanity's best hope for survival against impossible odds. Lieutenant Murphy reported they were approaching Cache Alpha with an estimated arrival time of 4 minutes. Hayes asked about the status of the pursuing fleet, and Commander Lisa Martinez coordinated data flowing in from the drone network scattered throughout the asteroid belt. All 11 remaining Concordate ships had committed to pursuit in a loose formation, designed to prevent the Vengeance from slipping past them. She estimated they would be in weapons range in 7 minutes. Hayes said that was perfect because the enemy was exactly where humanity needed them to be. He activated shipwide communications and told all hands to prepare for combat maneuvers. because this was going to get extremely rough. The Vengeance slipped through a gap between two tumbling asteroids and emerged in a relatively clear zone of space. In the center of this clearing floated the Cache Alpha asteroid, which was approximately 2 kilometers long and covered in the same dark pitted surface. As every other rock in the belt, Hayes ordered Helm to bring them to full stop relative to the cache. He told weapons to activate the package. The weapons officer confirmed the package was activating now. High Commander Vexthar watched from the divine mandate as the human ship suddenly stopped fleeing. His sensors showed the vessel holding position next to an unremarkable asteroid that looked like any other piece of space debris. Narvok reported they had stopped running and appeared to be taking up a defensive position. Vexthar felt satisfaction replace his earlier fury. The fools thought they could make a stand here. Did they think the Concordat would not follow? He ordered all ships to maintain formation in advance. They should prepare to fire on his command. This ended now, and the primitives would learn the price of defiance. The Concordat fleet moved forward with their formation designed to provide overlapping fields of fire. They had learned from the loss of Ship 7. No single vessel would be exposed or isolated. They would advance as one unified force and destroy the human ship through concentrated, overwhelming firepower. Then they would move on to subjugate Earth itself and teach these primitives their proper place in the galactic order. They did not notice the asteroid next to the Vengeance beginning to split open. Lisa reported that Cache Alpha was active, and all systems were coming online. The asteroid surface peeled back in sections, revealing not hollow rock, but a framework of human engineering. Cache Alpha was not a storage facility or a hiding place. It was a weapons platform, a massive, secretly constructed fortress bristling with railguns and missile batteries and energy weapons, and most importantly, hundreds of additional sensor drones. But that was not all. As the Concordat fleet advanced, 6 more asteroids throughout the combat zone began to open like mechanical flowers. Cache Beta and Gamma and Delta and Epsilon and Zeta and Eta. 7 hidden weapons platforms positioned perfectly to create overlapping fields of fire. The Concordat had walked directly into an ambush. Barnes at sensors reported the enemy was detecting the platforms now. The Concordat fleet was attempting to halt their advance. Hayes said coldly that it was too late. He told Lisa to light them up. Every weapons platform opened fire simultaneously. The space around the Concordat fleet suddenly filled with railgun rounds and missiles and energy beams and clouds of small kinetic projectiles. The volume of fire was absolutely staggering, and far more than any single battleship could generate. The Concordat shields held against the initial barrage, but the coordinated assault was designed to overwhelm through sheer volume. The drone network fed targeting data to all 7 platforms, and the Vengeance herself ensuring that every shot was precisely aimed at weak points in shield coverage. Vexthar roared for evasive maneuvers and ordered return fire on all platforms. The Concordat ships scattered, and their formation broke as individual captains maneuvered independently to avoid the killing zone. Some succeeded in evading the worst of the fire. Others were not as lucky. Ship 4 took concentrated fire from Cache Delta and the Vengeance. Its shields collapsed under the sustained assault, and railgun rounds tore through its hull like paper. The vessel went dark as life support failed, and its crew was trapped in a dying ship, Ship 9. Attempted to retreat but found itself caught between Cache Zeta and Cache Eta. A missile swarm overwhelmed its point defenses, and the ship disappeared in a series of massive explosions that lit up the asteroid field. 2 more Concordat vessels destroyed in the opening seconds of the engagement. Lisa reported 9 ships remaining, but the platforms were taking heavy return fire. They were heavily armored, but they could not maneuver to avoid incoming weapons. The Concordat was concentrating fire on the stationary targets. Hayes watched as Cache Gamma took a direct hit from 3 ships firing simultaneously. The platform shields failed, and energy lances carved through its structure. Secondary explosions rippled across its surface before it went completely silent. Lisa reported Gamma was down and Beta was taking heavy damage. Hayes said that was fine because the platforms had done their job. He ordered Helm to get them moving and told weapons to prepare the Havoc rounds. The weapons officer confirmed Havoc rounds were armed and ready. The Vengeance surged forward, no longer playing defense. Hayes had studied every record of Concordat military actions they could access. He understood their doctrine and their tactics and their assumptions. They fought with overwhelming force applied systematically. They expected enemies to either flee in terror or be destroyed quickly. They did not expect an enemy to get more dangerous as the fight progressed. The Havoc rounds were humanity's newest innovation developed specifically for this confrontation. Instead of traditional warheads, they contained millions of tiny metal fragments suspended in explosive gel. When they detonated near a target, they created a cloud of debris moving at extreme velocity. Individual fragments were too small for point defenses to target effectively, but each one carried enough kinetic energy to damage sensitive equipment. The Vengeance launched a full spread of Havoc rounds toward the Divine Mandate. Narvok warned of incoming missiles, and the point defenses engaged automatically. The Concordat flagship automated system shot down the missiles at a distance of 500 meters. The humans had missed their target, or so it seemed to the alien crew. The Havoc rounds detonated, and suddenly Vexithar viewscreen showed a glittering cloud expanding toward them at incredible speed. His shields could stop large objects easily, but the swarm of tiny fragments passed through the energy barriers like they were not even there. Thousands of high-velocity metal shards peppered the Divine Mandate hull and shredded external sensors and communication arrays and weapon housings. Narvok shouted that sensors were compromised and they were flying blind. Throughout the Concordat fleet, captains reported similar problems as more Havoc rounds detonated around them. Their sophisticated sensor systems, designed to track targets across millions of kilometers, were being degraded by simple kinetic shrapnel. Hayes muttered that it was time to adapt or die. He told Lisa to target Ship 8 because they had lost primary sensors, and should hit them before they could switch to backup systems. The Vengeance railguns spoke with thunder, and Ship 8, flying partially blind, could not maneuver in time. The rounds punched through weakened shields and tore into the vessel engineering section. The ship did not explode, but it went dead in space, completely powerless and drifting. 7 Concordat ships remained combat-capable, but now they were truly angry. Vexthar, with his pride in tatters and his fleet savaged by primitives, made a decision born of pure rage rather than sound tactics. He ordered all ships to concentrate fire on the human battleship. They should forget the platforms and focus everything on destroying that vessel. The 7 surviving warships turned their full attention on the Vengeance. The volume of fire was incredible, and more than any single ship could possibly withstand. Hayes ordered evasive maneuvers immediately. Murphy threw the Vengeance into a series of violent turns and rolls, but in open space there were limited options for avoiding fire. Energy beams grazed the hull. Missiles detonated close enough to rattle the entire ship. The shield generators screamed in protest as they absorbed blow after blow. Damage reports flooded in from all sections. The damage control officer shouted that shields were failing. Forward section was down to 10%.
Aft shields at 20%.
Another officer reported hull breaches on decks 4 and 7, with damage control teams responding. The engineering station reported the port fusion reactor was showing dangerous instability. The bridge filled with smoke and the sound of alarms. Hayes gripped his command chair as the ship shuddered under the relentless assault. They could not survive much more of this punishment. Lisa shouted over the chaos that they needed to retreat now before the ship was destroyed. Hayes said no and not yet. His mind raced through options and scenarios. They were losing this fight. The Concordat superior numbers were telling the story. In another minute, the Vengeance would be reduced to floating scrap and debris, unless they did something completely. 3 weeks after the battle in the asteroid belt, Ambassador Claire Morrison stood once again in the diplomatic chamber of Harmony 7 Station. Everything was different now compared to their first meeting. The Thraxian delegation that had once spoken to her with casual condescension now treated her with wary respect. The balance of power had shifted in ways that would ripple across the galaxy for generations to come. Diplomat Zarnell entered the chamber, and his movements were more subdued than before. Behind him came 3 high-ranking members of the Concordat Council, including a crystalline being that communicated through light patterns translated by sophisticated algorithms. Zarnell began by thanking Ambassador Morrison for agreeing to resume negotiations. His translator rendered his voice as carefully neutral without the earlier arrogance. Claire nodded politely, but did not extend her hand this time, because the social dynamics had fundamentally changed. She said the United Earth Council felt it was important to establish clear parameters for human concordat relations going forward. The crystalline being identified as Counselor Vextal pulsed with amber light. The being said perhaps they should begin by acknowledging that their initial approach to humanity had been based on incomplete information and certain assumptions that proved catastrophically incorrect. Claire replied evenly that was a diplomatic way of saying they tried to bully humanity into submission, and it backfired spectacularly. Sarnell Four Eyes blinked in sequence. In their earlier meeting, such a blunt statement would have been met with offense or anger. Now he simply inclined his head in acknowledgement of the truth. He explained that the battle in the solar system had been widely broadcast across concordate space. Captain Hayes' actions had generated significant debate among member species. Many were questioning policies that had been standard for millennia. Claire said that was good because humanity had some non-negotiable requirements for any relationship with the concordate. She activated a holographic display showing a document that had been drafted with input from every nation on Earth. First was complete recognition of Earth, sovereignty over the Sol system and any future human colonies. Second was immediate cessation of any military activity within 50 light-years of Earth without explicit human permission. Third was a formal treaty, recognizing humanity as an independent sovereign entity with full diplomatic standing, not 7th tier or 9th tier, but completely equal status. The concordate delegation exchanged glances, and their various methods of communication created a brief symphony of clicks and light pulses and pheromone releases. Sarnell said carefully that these terms were unprecedented. The tier system had governed concordate relations for 3,000 years. Claire said then perhaps it was time for the system to change. The galaxy was not static. The concordate had been the dominant power for a long time, but the battle proved that dominance was not permanent. Other species had watched what happened. They had seen that the concordate fleet could be beaten. How long before others started questioning whether they wanted to remain subordinate? Counselor Vextel pulsed with orange light, which the translator interpreted as thoughtful consideration. The counselor admitted Ambassador Morrison made a valid point. Their intelligence services reported increased unrest among several 7th and 8th tier species. The footage of a single human vessel defeating 12 concordate warships had become inspirational to those who chafed under the hierarchy. Claire pressed them to help turn this into something positive. They should accept Earth as a full partner and not a subject, show the other species that the concordate could adapt and could recognize strength and sovereignty when it encountered them, or refuse and watch as the hegemony gradually crumbled because they were too rigid to change. The negotiations continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The concordate needed to save face and needed to show they could be flexible. Humanity had proven they were willing to fight to the death rather than submit to anyone. The treaty was signed 2 days later and broadcast across both human and concordate communication networks. Earth was officially recognized as a sovereign power with full diplomatic standing. The Sol system was acknowledged as human territory. Most importantly, the concordate agreed to formal talks about restructuring their entire tier system. One human battleship had done what diplomacy alone never could have accomplished. It had earned respect through demonstrated strength and willingness to fight. Aboard the USS Vengeance, still undergoing extensive repairs in Earth orbit, Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the observation deck, watching repair crews swarm over the ship-damaged hull. The vessel had taken incredible punishment during the battle. 3 crew members had died and 17 more were seriously injured. The ship itself would be in dock for months undergoing repairs, but they had survived against impossible odds. They had won when everyone expected them to lose. Commander Lisa Martinez joined Hayes at the viewport and told him Admiral Brooks had called. He wanted to see Hayes at Fleet Headquarters tomorrow. Hayes said he supposed they wanted a detailed debrief of everything that happened. Lisa said that, and she thought they wanted to give him several medals. Hayes was a hero back on Earth now. Every news network was running stories about the battle. They were calling him the man who saved humanity from subjugation. Hayes shook his head and said it was not just him. It was the entire crew and the engineers who built the ship, and the scientists who developed their weapons, and everyone who refused to accept that humanity should bow to the concordate. They won because everyone worked together toward a common goal. Lisa smiled and said that was very modest, but he was the one who flew into point-blank range of the enemy flagship and blew it apart. That decision was all his. Hayes said that was desperation combined with a lot of luck. If the concordate had been more careful, and if they had not underestimated humanity so completely, then Earth would have lost. They could not count on their enemies being arrogant forever. Lisa asked what they should do then. Hayes said they needed to prepare constantly, build more ships and develop better weapons and tactics, establish colonies and spread throughout space so that no single attack could threaten the entire species. Make sure that the next time someone threatened humanity, they would be ready. Lisa nodded and mentioned the Admiral had said something about that. Apparently the Earth Defense Force was getting a massive budget increase. They wanted to build an entire fleet, and they wanted Hayes to help design it. Hayes looked out at the stars and thought about the vast galaxy that humanity was only beginning to explore. There were 47 species in the Concordat, and who knew how many beyond their borders. Some would become friends. Others would be enemies. Humanity needed to be prepared for all of them. He said they should build a fleet that no one would want to challenge, not because humanity was aggressive, but because they were too strong to be threatened. Peace through strength was the only way forward. In the Concordat capital world of Therax Prime, the Concordat Council convened an emergency session. The chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of species all. Watching the central display were footage from the battle played on repeat. Counselor Tresh, a six-legged being from the Kervalian homeworld, stated that the humans destroyed 12 warships with a single vessel. This was catastrophic for Concordat reputation. Multiple tier species were questioning whether they still needed Concordat protection if the mighty fleet could be defeated so easily. Counselor Varkesh, a methane-breathing species in an environmental suit, objected that they were not defeated easily. They were tactically outmaneuvered. There was an important difference. Counselor Vextel pulsed with red light indicating strong emotion. The being asked if there really was a difference. They sent warships with the assumption of easy victory. They made no serious effort to understand human capabilities or psychology. They treated humans as primitives to be conquered and not as potential threats. This failure was on the Concordat leadership and not on their military technology. The debate raged for hours, but eventually a consensus emerged. The Concordat would need to change fundamentally. The old system of tiers and automatic subordination for new species had proven vulnerable. If humanity could resist successfully, then others would try. The empire that had stood unchallenged for 3 millennia was entering a new era, whether they liked it or not. Counselor Tresh suggested that perhaps this was not entirely negative. The Concordat had grown stagnant over the centuries. Their military doctrines had not changed because they faced no real challenges. These humans had reminded them that complacency was dangerous. Maybe that was a lesson they needed to learn. Back on Earth, President Maria Lopez addressed the United Earth Council and through broadcast the entire planet. She said 3 weeks ago they faced a choice between surrender and resistance. They chose resistance, thanks to the bravery of Captain Hayes and the crew of the USS Vengeance, and thanks to the hard work of scientists and engineers, and thanks to the refusal to accept subjugation, humanity remained free. The chamber erupted in sustained applause. She continued that they should not become arrogant themselves. They won one battle and not the war for their place in the galaxy. They had a long road ahead. They must build and explore and grow. And they must do so